Hello there, I'm Sandy Allnock. Welcome to my YouTube channel where it is now 2025. And I am so glad it's 2025 because 2024 kind of stunk. There were a lot of bad things that happened in 2024. And I'm not a big believer in a day on the calendar changing everything necessarily. Just because we flip to 2025 doesn't mean everything's going to be different unless we intentionally do some things to make it different. I am not a New Year's resolution kind of person, but I am an intention kind of person. And when I choose a word for the year, which I don't do every year, it's with the hope that I will follow through with that and make something different happen in my life, and especially my life as an artist. Sometimes it's been grow or play, which has encouraged me to do those things, to learn new things, and to play with different materials and different styles that I hadn't done before. But this year, I have chosen the word observe. There's a lot of different reasons for it, and I'll unpack more of that as I talk about it throughout probably at least the first quarter until I forget I had a word of the year. But what I really want to help myself to do more of is making my art from observing things rather than just using someone's photograph as a reference to make a drawing or a painting. Because I've fallen into that rut. And it's not that it's bad to use someone's references, but I want to do a lot more painting and drawing on location, whether that's in my living room or whether that's outside or in a mall or wherever. That doesn't mean my channel is moving with me because it's really hard to film outside. If I find some ways to do that, I will be happy to share some of that with you, but you may just get clips of it in videos from time to time. I'm not really sure how that's going to go, but I want my practice for myself to be more about observing what I see around me. And that's where today's video comes to you from, the place of observance, because I'm going to show you phenology wheels. I had never even heard of one until I saw a video served up by YouTube by Marion's World. And she is a lovely artist. I'll link to her video down below because after you get done watching my video, you're going to have lots of questions. She may have many more answers for you, but I'm going to share the 5 questions I think you need to ask yourself if you want to start making a phenology wheel. And then I'm going to show you my process that I went through for creating mine and make my first entry since we are on January 1st. So what is phenology? I want to start by telling you what it's not, because I made a mistake and I don't want you to make the same one. I added an R to the word. Now, Marion didn't add that in hers. That's just what I heard. And I started doing research on phrenology, which is a terrible, terrible thing. It was a pseudoscience developed in the 1800s in which some dude decided to go into mental institutions and prisons and measure people's skulls. And he would look for where they had bumps on them. And then he decided from sample sizes sometimes of 2 people that if you had a bump in this particular part of your head, then you were going to be a murderer or a rapist. That was expanded for people to justify imperialism and justify slavery. Very terrible thing. Phrenology with an R. And I kept looking for the place where phrenology became this lovely journaling thing. And it never happened until I realized I had the wrong word. So phenology. Let's go to Wikipedia and find out what Wikipedia has to say because I need it straightened out. Phenology is the study of periodic events in biological life cycles and how these are influenced by seasonal and interannual variations in climate, as well as habitat factors, such as elevation. They give you lots of examples. The emergence of leaves and flowers, first flight of butterflies, first appearance of migratory birds, the date of leaf colors coming out and their fall in deciduous trees, the dates of egg-laying of birds and animals, amphibia, the timing of development cycles for bees, the etymology of the word. It's derived from the Greek word pheno, I think that's how you say it, to show, to bring light, to make appear. And the other half of the word is from logos, the study, discourse, reasoning. These two together indicate that phenology has been principally concerned with the dates of first occurrence of biological events in their annual cycle. The only way to know whether or not you're observing the first fall of a leaf in autumn is by noting it, by really looking around you and making note when you saw the first leaf change color or the first leaf hit the ground. And phenology wheels can help you do that. There's a bunch of different ways to do them, and I'm going to talk about that, but I also want to give you the 5 decisions I think you need to make before deciding what kind of phenology wheel that you want to make. First decision you need to make is, what do you want to observe? Are you interested in plants overall, like all the plants around you, or a particular plant and how it develops? Are you interested in wildlife or birds? Or what's going on in the sky above you, the rocks that you walk past on your walk every day, the soil types in the area that you live. It depends on what's around you, and there are lots of apps that you can get to help start to identify those things, like iNaturalist, LeafSnap, Merlin, Seek, Rocked. There's just so many of them. There's even one called Skyview that I'm interested in trying at some point. And it will show you, if you turn your camera up to the sky, what's that constellation? So I could use that kind of help from an app. All right, that's decision 1. Decision 2 is, how often would you like to journal? You can do this daily, 365 days a year, or just 31 days. You can just do 1 month. And you can pick what month you want to do it. If you're really observing just one plant, you want to watch your rose bush, then start one that's just going to be for your rose bush, so you can follow it and find out how long one of those roses lasts on your rose bush. You can do something weekly. You can just do one observance every week for a year. You can do something that is monthly. So you just make a wheel with 12 spaces in it. So you're just making one notation for each month. You need to think about how often you want to do it, how dedicated you think you will be to getting it done. Decision number 3 is, what data do you want to capture on your phenology wheel? And in that, you can decide on, maybe temperature is important to you. You want to see what the temperature is each day, watch it progress, and maybe next year you can look back and say, it's cooler this year. Oh, it's warmer this year than it was last year. And you'll have that on your own reference. You can document your sunrises and sunsets. And maybe that'll help you to be more optimistic about longer days coming in these dark days of winter. Decision number 4 is, what medium will you use? What art medium? Because that's going to affect the kind of paper you use and the size that you make it. If you want something really small, you might want to use colored pencils because you can get into smaller details with that. If you're going to use crayons, you might want to make one bigger because, crayons don't get into tiny detail. But you can use watercolor, alcohol markers, whatever you want. But you need to decide for that particular wheel. You can change it up throughout the year if you're going to do multiples, but pick one to start with. That brings us to decision number 5, which is, what format are you going to use? Do you want to take this outdoors with you? In which case you want to draw it in a sketchbook. And that means it's going to be kind of small because you need to fit it into a sketchbook. Kind of a 2-page spread. I've seen people do that. But I did come up with a plan for myself where I'm going to make 10 by 10 circles, big ones, and I'm going to try first a 31-day one in January, and I'm also going to start a weekly and a monthly just to see which one I continue with long term. So let's get started. I'll show you how I made the wheels that I'm going to be using and my first journal entry. So let's start with a 32-section phenology wheel, which is going to work for either daily journaling or for weekly journaling. And then I'll show you a separate one for a 12-section phenology wheel. So I got out different kinds of watercolor paper. I decided on not using the hot press eventually because I want to do something that I have more paper for. I'm almost out of hot press. And I'm using all cold press watercolor paper for watercolor plus pen and ink. So make a crisscross for the center of your paper. And I'm using quarter sheets so that I can make a 10-inch circle. which means the center is 5 inches. And I'm using a compass. You can use a plate or something to trace around, but you'll need a series of plates so that you can make some other size circles. So I'm marking my outer ring at 1/2 inch. The center ring, you can make it whatever size you want. Depends on how fancy you want to get with putting art in that little center ring. And I kind of did a test one of mine first so I could get my measurements down for what I think will work. So I tested one out on a scrap piece of paper so I could try to write little numbers into my data rings. And then I kind of had a better idea of what I am marking. Over on my blog, I'm going to have the measurements for these and the pictures of all of my wheels so that you can follow those if you want. But literally, you can just make up whatever you want because it's all about you journaling what's going on in your community. So you're going to make circles around each one of those. And the data circles will be smaller than maybe the label circles and stuff. So, it's entirely up to you. Go to Pinterest and look at what other people have done as well. So I don't have a protractor around, so I went with the method of just measuring the center between 2 points on my wheel, those 2 cross beams. And I'm just going to start by making those. So I'm dividing each quadrant in half. If you have a protractor, then you'll do 45 degrees because that's a 90-degree angle. You just take half of it and make a mark. And you're going to line that up. You only have to do 2 quadrants to start with. Line it up to draw these chords. That's what they're called. I looked that up on the Googles. So join the chords with the center point, and then you'll have a line that you can make all the way across to the other quadrant. And that's going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4 on top and 4 on the bottom. So you have 8 sections. If you ever need an 8-section phenology wheel, that's how you do that. Next up, you want to mark those halfway points again. And this time, instead of just doing 2 sections, we're going to divide 4 sections, because then when we go to make those chords going across the entire circle, we'll be able to divide them all, and that's going to give us 16. Because remember, we're starting out with 8, so we're dividing those in half. You can choose whether or not you want your chords to go all the way through the center point. And sometimes I did that, sometimes I didn't. You can always erase those lines. But for me, it helped to erase them before I started going in with pen because I didn't want those lines coming through like the middle of it, since I wanted to put a design in there. But if you end up forgetting that and you goof it up, just cut out a circle that's that size and glue it on. This is journaling. This is not like anything that's going to end up in the Louvre. We're just journaling for our own personal usage. And sure, it'll end up being beautiful regardless, but you don't necessarily have to go too crazy about trying to be perfect. So now we have 16 sectors, and we have to divide those in half. I found that rather than trying to measure 8 more of these, I was just fine with eyeballing the general center of each one of these. And I did it all the way around each of the 16 because I found my accuracy was not all that great on some of them. And just marking those middle points was going to be much more helpful. When you start to put your pen and ink in there, if you decide to make pen and ink lines, you can change those up a little bit because some of my sections were a little off and I adapted them at that point. Because that's why you want to do this stuff in pencil so you can fix it. Because if you're anything like me, there's always fixing necessary. You can see that mine did not come out 100% equidistant, and I could fix that. If you're just leaving them in pencil, you can erase a line and redraw it. But if you're using pen and ink to outline these sectors, then you can do that very easily by just moving your ruler over a skosh. When you're choosing the pen that you're going to use, if you want to outline these, then make sure you're using something compatible with the medium, because you don't want to end up getting this far and then discovering that your medium is going to wash away your pen lines and bleed them and that sort of thing. I even just went by hand tracing those circles. I don't know if there's a compass that you can put a pen in. There probably is, but for this, I didn't find it worth it to even go look and find out because I'm not going to buy one for something I'm just using for journaling. Then pencil in any of the numbers that you want to put in as notations. and then go over those in pen and ink, and you can remove any pencil lines. And since this is a 32 space wheel, I used one of them to just label the month and then hand cut out my circles. And I left a little bit of space around them because I didn't know if I wanted a white line around the edge or not. I can always cut off more. But I cut that out and then decided to paint something fun on the inside. And since it's January, I thought it would be nice to put perhaps a snowflake in here. So I'm using some masking fluid called Pebeo Drawing gum. And I'm just going to paint a snowflake in here with this. And with masking fluid, what it does when it dries is block off anything that you want to remain white. And then your paint goes around the outside edges of that. So this gave me a white snowflake that I can have color behind. For January, what I wanted to create for my wheel was going to be all of the greens that are around me because I live in a very green place. And I thought it would be fun to document what is still green along my walks in my yard, in my neighborhood, and what is still green in January, because pretty much everything. And what kinds of greens are they? Are those greens going to change later in the year? So I'll be able to go back and look and see if they changed. So I'm using some green colors, just a mixture of a couple of different greens to put behind the snowflake. And that's going to set aside to dry while we talk about another wheel. While I was making my January wheel, I decided to keep going and make a 52-week wheel because sometimes there might be things that I see on my walk as I become more observant that I want to document, but it doesn't fit into the theme for January. So what do I do with a bird that I find? Or if some flower has come out and I want to document that somewhere, I can put that on a weekly wheel, like my little special thing that I saw that week. So in order to make a weekly wheel, we need to do a little number juggling. 32 and 32 is obviously 64 sections, and we only need 52. So what do you do with the extras? I decided I would put in a title for each one of these two Phenology wheels. And on one, I ended up with 3 spaces for it. The other, I ended up with 2. What did I do with the others? They're fit into the places in the calendar they belong. So it's things like first day of summer, first day of spring, first day of fall, first day of winter, plus Earth Day, and I put Christmas in there and Thanksgiving. You can put any special days that might relate to things that are outdoors and add them into your calendar. I would write them out, write a list of the ones that you prefer and see how many spaces you have left over. You might end up having all of those spaces filled in and have no title at all whatsoever. But in my data wheel, right underneath where January starts, you can see the numbers. That is looking at the calendar for each week. 1 through 7 is Wednesday through Tuesday, and all of my weeks go Wednesday through Tuesday. So you can kind of see how they came out with nice rainbow colors around the outside. And you can see I've indicated some of the special days that I included in my Phenology wheels for week by week. And I also painted a little painting on the centers of each one just to get them started with some art. Now let's talk about making a 12-section Phenology wheel this time, because you might want to just do something once a month. And that's really it. You just want to do something simpler. So that way, the math is a little bit different than the 32 sections. So instead of dividing those initial quarters into 2 sections and then subdividing those into 2 sections and then those into 2, you need to divide these into thirds. Now you can use, if you have one, a protractor and do, 30 degrees and 60 degrees to match with your 90 degrees in either direction. I just kind of did some ballpark math. These didn't come out really accurate. Once I drew the lines in, I could see that, but I just adapted it when I did the pen and ink stuff. So you divide them any way you wish, but just remember it's 12 sections. It's like a clock. And if you can figure out a clock, you can figure this out, right? So just going to do the pen and ink work again. I'm going to do this one in watercolor and pen and ink as well. I don't know what subjects I'm going to do in this yet, But since I was making Phenology wheels, I just decided to keep going at it, because if I know me, if I have to go back and figure out again, okay, now what size did I make those? And how did I do this part? And how did I do that part? Then it's going to be really difficult for me to continue, because going back and relearning something and remembering how to make it is just going to be too hard. So making one for my first month, for my weekly, and one for a monthly just seemed like it was going to work best for me to do them all at the same time. Now, if I decide to do another one for the month of February, I'm going to have to figure out again, but I'm not going to worry about that quite yet. Just going to get these done. Now, you want to erase all your pencil lines after you get everything finished, and you can decide whether you want to paint the outside edges, those labels for the months. You can do anything you want with these. I don't even know what data I'm going to collect in these as of yet. So I decided I'm just going to decorate the center with a flower in watercolor and pen and ink, and then I'll do the labels around the outside, and then I'm just going to let it sit for a bit, and I'll think about it, because until the end of January I don't have to have a decision made, right? So I used 2 different yellows for this, a cool yellow and a warm yellow, just to have some variation in my flower. Once that dried, I painted around the outside edges of it with some of the leftover greens that were in my palette from making that snowflake, which you're going to see in just a minute, and dropped in just a couple different colors. So I started with one wash of a lighter color and then just dropped in darker pigments. And since that was all on the wet side, they blended really nicely together, which was great. And then I could dry it completely and get out the pen and ink work to do more detail in this. Then I got out a pen, and normally I use fountain pens, but for this project I thought using a dip pen, especially this one, was going to be really good, because this nib is really small and it's going to give me a lot of super fine detail. And in some of these smaller spaces on my wheels, I might actually end up needing a really fine pen, especially when it gets to writing some of that small data in. If I want to write in, sunrises and sunsets and things, there's going to be a couple of numbers to write in those small spots. And a thinner pen might help. If you don't have a dip pen, you can obviously use a micron pen or anything that's got a small point on it. And you can even use a pencil. Like, pencil is fine. But here I'm adding in a little detail around the outside of the flower. Now, I don't know what I'm going to put on this wheel yet. I don't know what data I'll collect. By the end of the month, hopefully I'll do a recap of my first Phenology wheel month and let you know what I'm going to do with that. So now let's look at my first daily entry. Started off by going outside, and the first plant I see right next to my driveway is this one. And I use the iNaturalist app to identify what it is. I've never looked to see what it is. I can't believe I've never even asked myself the question, what is this? It's a cherry laurel, apparently. It does have white flowers that come up at certain times of the year. I don't even remember when that blooms. I just remember seeing these white flower things. So it's going to be interesting to see how much observation kicks in just now that I know what that thing is. I've taken that poor little bush for granted. So today is its moment to shine, and I'm going to paint the leaf. Just put in a wash of a light color, and then I'll start adding darker values to it to start adding some of the shadows and stuff. Now, the angle that I'm painting at is different than the angle you're seeing. You're seeing it from overhead, so I got a little different light on my view of it. So that'll be a bit of a change. But another thing that ended up happening throughout all of this was that as I was painting it, I was having so much fun putting in darker values. I would just mix thicker color, which you do with watercolor by just putting in more paint and less water, and then dropping it in wet and wet into the light color, because I wanted to have that variance of the lighter color and the darker color. And as I started doing this, I was realizing I was having so much fun doing that I was not going to probably put any pen and ink on this. Now, I might go back and change my mind on it by the time I do a few other entries. And I have decided to give myself grace on making that decision right now. Because this leaf came out kind of pretty, and I was pretty pleased with it. But in comparison to the mess I made in that center section with my snowflake, that snowflake was created, as you saw, by using masking fluid. But then I thought, oh, wait a minute, if I'm going to use pen and ink for my drawings in this, then I'm going to want to use pen and ink here. And I started doodling around my snowflake, and it came out looking kind of mucky anyway. This one might end up with me cutting a new circle for that center part and letting it be just watercolor and white paper. But I am going to wait and give myself grace to make that decision. Because the nice thing about a Phenology wheel is, one, it's just for me. It's not for anybody else aside from here on YouTube. But I can also change things as I feel like it. And you can do the same with yours. You can do a different medium in every one of these sections. If that makes you happy, then do that. And if I decide that I want this to just be all watercolor instead of watercolor with pen and ink, I can easily just cut a new circle and glue it over top of that and make a new snowflake that isn't going to have the pen and ink in it. So here I'm trying to figure out if I can get these water droplets to look like water droplets. They're kind of drying on my leaf there in front of me, but I can see them from the angle that I'm at. And there's a whole bunch of them on there. And just painting in shadows underneath of them and the different color variations that I see in the drops themselves. And I suspect I will potentially have more rainy leaves in my future because it is very, very rainy in the winter here. I used some leftover paint to paint in that outer band with all the numbers in it. The next one is going to be all of the high temperatures for each day. And the two inner circles are going to be for the sunrise and sunset. Now, how did I get this video done when I had not yet at the time experienced January 1st? Well, it's because you can do this a little bit ahead of time. You can cheat by looking up these data points on the interwebs. Yes, you can find them. So if you go on a trip or you get sick and you miss a couple, you can always catch up on the data. But I highly recommend just sticking to it because that's what I'm going to try to do. So if you would like to see the finished wheel at the end of the month, then come on back, make sure you're subscribed and hit that little button that tells YouTube that you want all of my videos sent to you. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter because I will be maybe sharing a few peeks in there. I'll put links to all of that, including Marion's video, my blog, like the whole 9 yards will be in the doobly-doo, which is the description below the video. And I'll see you in just a couple days with another bit of fresh inspiration for you. Thank you so much. Hit the like button on your way out because it makes the algorithm so happy. And it makes me happy too. So I will see you guys later. Take care. Bye-bye.